All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Rocky Mountain NetSuite User Group meeting. This is turning out to be our new normal, which I think everybody has a new normal at this point. We are for sure going to do this meeting and probably the next meeting remotely as well, so plan on that. Thank you for joining us this morning. First thing we'll talk about here is our agenda. You probably already had a chance to read through this. I'll go through it anyway. Until about 8:50 this morning, we're going to talk about our general business of the user group. Then for 10 minutes, we'll hear from Viremia, our meeting sponsor today. And then our main presentation from 9 to 11, that is our workflow overview, extending NetSuite with SuiteFlow. And that's presented or will be presented by Alex Kopischke from RSM. And then our open forum. So we're going to try something a little bit different today. We haven't been comfortable with our online meetings enough yet to do the open forum. So we're going to give it a shot today and spend about half an hour. So if you have any questions or challenges, we should be able to attempt to answer those or at least point you in the right direction through our open forum. If you have any questions throughout the meeting today, please feel free to post a message in the chat window and we'll be monitoring that and help to answer questions as we go. So membership count for the user group, we currently have over 1,000 members, 1,049 members as part of our group. Membership is free. You can register at rmnsug.org. If you register to become a member, that ensures that you get notifications of upcoming meetings and events. You have the ability to attend meetings remotely. Actually, you don't have a choice these days, but normally, in a normal circumstance when we have in-person meetings, you do have to be a member to attend remotely. We also have a LinkedIn forum. Membership gives you access to that forum. It's if you go to LinkedIn and search for Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group, that should come up and you can join the forum by requesting membership. You also, as a membership, get a $400 discount to SuiteWorld, which we'll talk about SuiteWorld a little bit later here as far as whatever there is to talk about. And then as a member, you're also eligible for CPE credits when they're available. So far, we've had CPE credits available for each of our meetings since we've been applying for them. So today's meeting, you'll have 2 credits available. And so if you are not a member, please sign up to make sure that those CPE credits are for members only. We'll talk about CPE in a little bit here as well. So membership, also our LinkedIn user group forum, we have 477 members as part of that forum currently. The purpose of our LinkedIn group is to support fellow members with questions and answers, to follow up with questions and answers from meetings that maybe some things that we can't get to during the meeting. You also have the ability to post job openings, and that's basically our main channel of communication other than email. We are going to post our announcements there, our presentations, the notes, and then discounts to SuiteWorld. That type of thing is going to be posted on our LinkedIn forum. So if you want to stay in touch with us and hear from us, that's a good way to stay in touch. The thing about the LinkedIn forum, though, is it's the notification system is a little bit different. You can't, as far as we are able to tell, we can't really get a constant stream of messages from the LinkedIn forum. So it's a good idea to just maybe check in on that forum once a week, see if there's anybody that has any questions that you might be able to help with, or if you have your own questions, you can post them there as well. So I'd like to take just a moment here. If there are any member announcements, you can post that in the chat window, and I will mention that here in this time slot. You can mention job openings, or if you're looking for a job, or any NetSuite related announcements. So does anybody have any announcements now? If you do, go ahead and post those in the chat window. We'll wait just a minute or two for that. So far, no announcements. That's okay. Okay, so last chance. Going once, going twice. I don't see any posts, so we'll go ahead and move on at this point. And remember that you can always go to our LinkedIn forum if you think of something later to announce. A couple of reminders. Evaluations will be emailed to you today to complete. Please complete that evaluation. It helps the user group board guide or direct us in what we do in the future, if we can make any improvements to the meetings or the format or any of the content, things like that. And then also, please register for events using the same email address as your membership record so that you don't end up with two memberships. As a user group, we use a production NetSuite account that NetSuite provisions to us, and it's just like a duplicate customer records. If you use two different email addresses, it's going to create a duplicate member record for you. If you don't mind getting multiple emails every time we send out an email, then that's up to you, but we do prefer that you try and use the same email address that you've registered with initially. I would like to make a special announcement, our events chair. I'd like to welcome back Dana Larson, and I don't know that she's on the meeting today. I think she couldn't necessarily be here. Let me just check real quick. Doesn't look like it. But anyway, Dana used to be our speaker chair. She did that for about 5 years, and now she is an end user and a self-employed NetSuite consultant. So we are very excited to have her back on the board, and she will take on the events chair, which is the person that is going to be responsible for managing our events once we get in-person events back in available for us. So we'll move on from there. So CPE credits, there will be 2 CPE credits for today. And I just realized that that's all squished together at the bottom there. Basically, if you have any problems with the CPE credits, you can email info@rmnsug.org. When you register for the meeting, you can check the box that says that you're interested in CPE credits, and then we'll send you an email, which if you did that, you should have received an email, I believe it was Monday night, that gave you instructions on obtaining those CPE credits. We will have 2 keywords throughout the meeting today that you'll use when you check in for your credits, and there will be a check-in spot here just a little bit later. And then I just wanted to mention that CPE credits are sponsored by Eide Bailly. So our meeting sponsorship, the way that we run our user group is membership to the user group is free. So that's members like you. And the cost of our meetings is supported by 2 levels of sponsorship. We have a Suite App sponsor and consulting sponsors. Suite App sponsors must be available through suiteapp.com, and consulting sponsors must offer NetSuite consulting services and have certified NetSuite consultants on staff. You can sign up if you're interested, you and your company is interested in sponsoring. You can learn more at rmnsug.org/sponsorship. A little bit about our upcoming meetings. July this year, Back to Basics. That will be also known as NetSuite 101. This is NetSuite for new folks to the platform, and the presenter there will be Dana Larson, and that meeting will also be held remotely for sure. Our July is only a couple months away, and the pandemic doesn't look like it's going to be changing anytime soon, so we've already made that determination. For the September meeting, we are going to discuss that at our board meeting in June and hopefully have an idea of what we'll be able to do there. So anyway, July, Back to Basics. September is our customization meeting, so that's fields, records, centers, lists, and tabs. And then also 2020.2 updates. We should be able to discuss those at that point of the updates that are coming there. And then Suite World updates, should have put a question mark on the end of that. That is if Suite World still plans on happening in August. We'll have to see on that. November, this is a new one for us. This is going to be SuiteScript for non-scripters. That's going to be presented by our own Mike Kackline, who is a developer and NetSuite guru in general, and he is going to teach us non-scripters about scripting. So that should be a great meeting. And then in January next year, we're going to go back and do a deep dive on safe searches. So that's our upcoming meetings for the next half year or so. Suite World was postponed until August 10 through 13th. We don't know if this is going to happen or not. Again, it's only a couple months away. It's hard to see right now that there would be a way to hold Suite World still, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. And as soon as we know anything, we'll post it on our LinkedIn forum. I'm sure everybody here would also be hearing about that as well. So a little bit about our CPE compliance. CPE and attendance credits. To receive CPE for attending today's session, you must sign in and out of the session using code words. The facilitator, me, will provide the first code word at the start of the session and then provide you a checkout code once the session is complete. So once Alex's presentation is complete, I'll present that last code or the second code for you to sign in with the sign out code. So you can log in with your phone. You can also log in through your computer. If you want to log in with your phone, you open your camera on your phone and hold it up for focusing on the QR code. I'll have that here in just a couple of minutes. And then the link should open on your phone, bring you to the check-in page. You fill out the information and enter in the check-in word that is on the slide that we'll show you here in just a minute. If you want to log in with your computer, you click the link that was provided to you in the email. Again, that email was sent out on Monday evening, and you fill out the information. It's basically the same site that you would get to on your phone. So if you have any questions or problems with that, again, you can email info@rmnsug.org, but I encourage you to make sure you do the check-in process today. So I'd like to say thank you to our Suite App sponsor today, Viremia. We will hear from Viremia here in just a couple of minutes. And I also wanted to mention that we have a secondary sponsor today that I don't believe was able to be with us, but that would be our consulting sponsor, and that is NetGain. You can learn more about NetGain system at netgain.tech. And so they are just our secondary sponsor for the day, but we are very thankful to our primary sponsor, Viremia. So for those of you that are interested in the CPE credits, this is your check-in code. Number 1, the check-in code word is computer. So there's the QR code. I'm going to leave that up on the screen for just a minute. You can scan that with your phone, and that'll take you to the check-in page, or you can go to the link that was emailed to you on Monday night. So I'll just wait just a minute for that. And so there is a question. You are able to get the credit still. You can go ahead and just scan that QR code right now. If you did not sign up previously or you forgot to check that CPE credits box, you can scan the QR code and check in just the same. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. And if anybody needs to get this QR code back, you can ask me at the beginning and I will come, or at the end of the meeting, I'll come back and post that. So now I'd like to turn this over to Bill Jones, the account executive from Viremia. He is going to talk to us about what Viremia can help you with for about 10 minutes or so. So give us just a moment here to switch over. And Bill, I see you're unmuted. Are you?
I'm waiting to be able to access the screen share, and then I'm ready to go.
I'm going to stop sharing, and I will make you presenter. So you should have gotten the presenter capability now.
Not quite yet. I'm sure it's thinking about it. Not yet.
Oh, I clicked on Make Presenter.
There's no other Bill Jones on here, is there? There could be.
I don't think so. Margie, can you try and click and make Bill Presenter? For some reason, I keep clicking and it's not making.
In worst case, I can always go out and try to come back in too. Just let me know.
Okay.
I did try. I got the same results as you.
Are you on,
let me leave.
on the web version or the app version, Bill?
I'm not sure. I think I'm on the web version.
Okay. Should still allow you to. Yeah, go ahead and log back in.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to get a cup of coffee, this might be a good time to do it while Bill is logging back in.
Or it'll give you an opportunity to post any job openings, or if you're looking for work, etc., and you can post that while we're waiting to.
Yeah, I still don't have access to the screen.
Hang on 1 second. I'm gonna try one other thing.
Sure.
Okay. How's that?
That's really good. That looks like it.
Perfect.
So y'all should see my screen. As soon as you do, I'll start.
Go for it.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Just ahead of this, we're doing a little raffle on a $25 Amazon gift card. So go ahead and take the link to the SurveyMonkey form that was in the register, the email reminder on Monday, and you'll go ahead and be able to register for that. Quick agenda, not going to spend much time here, we'll get right into things. I'm Bill Jones with Viremia Account Executive. I joined here about a year ago, and prior to that spent 5.5 years in the NetSuite services space as an account manager and in business development, and working with a lot of companies like yourself. Very happy to be here today. Our main goal at Viremia is to make your company easier to buy from, and we do that by completely removing order errors and drastically increasing the efficiency of your sales process. We were founded about 8 years ago, quickly made a name for ourselves with our powerful platform, easy to use user interface, and our outstanding customer service. And a short time later, we developed a native NetSuite suite app, which has been very successful. And the two of those combined have given us a lot of business success over the years. So some of you might be new to the world of CPQ, so sort of want to define that. You know, configuration is used by companies offering products or services that come with options. Salespeople and customers have a need to work through the selection of these options quickly and accurately. And for many companies, this process is manual and can take many minutes to hours or longer, and is often the #1 source of costly order errors. Pricing, of course, is done by all companies. It's dependent upon the configuration itself, customer information, item information, on-demand discounting by the salesperson, etc. Now, this is done in parallel. Pricing is done in parallel to configuration for a manufacturer, wholesaler, or a retailer. However, you know, software companies and service companies also do configuration in a way if you consider that they're using spreadsheets or work breakdown structures to determine a complex price or a range of hours. The Q in CPQ is quoting. A lot of companies have very manual, time-consuming quote processes, and CPQ helps automate that process to ensure across the company consistency in pricing, in content, and can even help position your company as a leader in your market segment. So to summarize, CPQ allows for the selection of a product, determination of a price, and delivery of a quote to the customer in a fast, 100% accurate way while maintaining full discount discipline and document control. So companies choose Viremia in particular for two main reasons. The first reason is our CPQ is the only NetSuite native CPQ on the market. So that means there's no integration. We reside as a bundle within your NetSuite instance, and this gives you unsurpassed speed and agility. We have access to anything in NetSuite and can process it and deliver the result to you. And as you can expect from a NetSuite native solution, we're always up to date because our new releases come out with your biannual NetSuite releases. In addition to that, our architecture is highly flexible and allows for the rapid addition of new business rules by your own internal team. You don't always have to see us. The second reason companies buy from us is really the people. We're committed to providing best-in-class support for all of our customers throughout the customer lifecycle. Moving into our specific solutions, our configurator is going to completely eliminate errors from your sales cycle. It's easy to use. It's capable of handling the most complex configurations or calculations. It will ensure all parts of a configuration are compatible and without errors. In addition, our configurator can handle the creation of new NetSuite item records, bills of materials, shop flow routings, and even part numbers if you need. And we only build those on demand, so we don't take up a lot of overhead within your NetSuite to do that. Also, native NetSuite, our guided selling tool is just the ticket for those items that do not require configuration, like an item that might be on a shelf. It's super easy to use. It's got an Amazon-like interface and allows your sales team to drill down into the exact product they're looking for quickly and easily. In addition, it has powerful cross and upsell capabilities that ensure that you maximize not only the customer experience, but also the dollar amount per order. And like configurator, guided selling takes into account changes that you make on your pricing, your promotions, or on your customer discount structures, and those are immediately available to your team so they never skip a beat in their day-to-day. And lastly, guided selling can be combined with configurator to let your team sell either configured or standard items quickly and 100% error-free. Our proposal generator is an add-on feature for configurator and guided selling and allows you to quickly make, simple one-page quotes or even complex multi-page proposals that could have a lot of content, rich content like marketing, engineering, images, things of that nature. We can create other documents as well, and those documents are just a couple clicks away, and you've got a PDF that you can email to your customer. For the last couple of years, we've been seeing a trend of more and more businesses looking to do B2B online commerce. And the COVID-19 pandemic now has put that front and center on every B2B company's plate. And Viremia is pre-positioned to help companies allow their customers and their partners to do their own self-serve configurations, quotes, and orders via the customer and advanced partner centers within NetSuite. And all of that, again, is 100% error-free. So with that, I want to dip into a little bit of demo to finish up here. So our solutions launch from a NetSuite quote page like you see here. Go ahead and we would click on configure, and we would launch the configurator that in this case looks like this. It's very NetSuite-ish. We have a summary field that's going to track a lot of things, pricing and what items we select, validations if we bump into any rule violations, images if it makes sense. And our configurator is set up to ask questions. Those answers will give more questions or it will impact the price. So you can see I can answer the question of door family and I can select joinery, and now I'm getting more questions. So I can go ahead and select based on images like this and like this. I can select via radio buttons, drop down, number of different ways that you can ask questions and get those answers. And again, here in the summary, you see that I'm already starting to fill in what this door is, including our part number and the pricing breakdown to that. So if I continue in with this, I'm not going to bore you with the actual questions. Those of you familiar with doors will know. But we'll step into the next section here to do some cutouts on the factory floor. So I'm going to need hinges, handles, and door locks. And you'll see some of the changes that we've set up here. I've got a diagram. I've also got number of hinges, and this is interesting that I cannot select 2 or 3 hinges because our business rules are kicking in. For a door of this size that I selected, I can only select 4 hinges. And interestingly about our solution is if I go deeper into this and I make a change that impacts that 4 hinges you see here, and I can no longer, and 4 hinges is incompatible with my new selections, it's going to throw a red flag to me front and center. Our other competitors don't have that. You have to complete the configuration, go back and see it again to see those types of errors. We can also do calculations, and when I make a change here to the inches from the top for the first hinge to 15, you'll see it changes here, and I'll change that back. You can see that's real time. Okay. Moving into hardware, I can make selections like a handle and a lock. And in this case, I see that the lock material and the door handle, they are different finishes. So it's giving me a warning saying, hey, are you sure you want to do that? I can see that also in the bill of materials, which is generated dynamically. I've got a nickel handle, bronze deadbolt, nickel hinge. Of course, I do want to change that back and have that match up. So I'll match that up, and it's immediately reflected on that bill of materials. And in fact, it's recognized that I have a kit available, the handle and deadbolt kit, and it's going to populate that on the bill of materials. So I can select install, ship separate, a whole host of other things, including figuring out pricing, let that salesperson negotiate with the customer. But I would go ahead and I would submit that, and it would land in NetSuite. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. And while now it saves here to NetSuite, I would have to save that, open it back up to access proposal here. So I've done one ahead of time just to show you what it would look like. And our proposal generator will allow you to generate as many templates as you wish for your business. And they could, be simple quotes like I mentioned before, or something with a lot of rich content like you see here. So we could print, PDF or Word doc this, images, company information to help sell the customer on the company, tie back information about the quote in NetSuite. I selected the wrong image there despite my best effort, and here you see the description of that configuration, what makes this unique, and then this portion is pretty much anything else that you might have. In addition to pulling in information that's unique to the door, we pull in information that's unique to the customer. So if you've got particular payment information or terms and conditions on the customer record, we can bring that into the proposal dynamically as well. So that was a real fast look at CPQ, how it can impact your business and what it looks like and how easy it is to use. I want to thank you all again for your time today. It's been a pleasure being here. I wish I could have been there in person. And don't forget to fill out that raffle, and I'll announce those during the open forum at the end of today's meeting. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill, and thank you again for sponsoring our user group. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and switch over to Alex Kopischke, and we'll make sure that we can get that. So if you could, there you go. So Alex, let's first do an audio check.
Yeah. Hey, Corey, do I sound okay?
Yep, sounds good. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so I think you should have presentation capabilities at this point.
Yes, and let me know if everyone can see my screen here in just a minute.
We can see your screen. So just a couple of announcements real quick that came through for the member announcements. Wide Open West is looking for an accounts payable manager. They say, Tracy says, great company and great team. And then also Allison, corporate controller position open at S&W Seed in Longmont. If you could both please make sure that you post those on our LinkedIn forum so that folks have a place to go find out more about your company, that would be great. Thanks. All right, Alex, so I think we're ready to go. If you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you, Corey, and get this started. Thanks first off for having me. My name is Alex Kopischke, and I'm a NetSuite functional consultant at RSM. I'm located in the Minneapolis office, and I'll be giving the presentation of an overview of working with SuiteFlow today. So a bit about my background. I've been working with NetSuite for a few years now. One of those years with RSM, I was with another NetSuite partner before. And as a functional consultant, I've just found a lot of value so far in my career with workflows of having the opportunity to create customizations without necessarily escalating to a developer and being able to handle just one-off scenarios. So I'm hoping I can convey some of those practical takeaways to everyone here today. So to start with, I'll walk through this agenda. We'll first be going through an overview of SuiteFlow. So what is it? What are some pros and cons? How does it compare to other customization methods? The next one will be managing existing workflows. So this is more for the maintenance and administrative pieces. These first two topics will be taking place in PowerPoint. The last piece will be workflow demonstrations. There we'll actually be going into NetSuite, really walking through and building a workflow from scratch. I know Corey alluded to that we can ask questions throughout this, so I'm gonna echo that too, that if we can ask questions during this, help make this a bit more engaging, help me avoid talking into my computer for 2 consecutive hours, I would appreciate it, and we can hopefully get those answered. And we'll also have a 10-minute break here in the middle of this, so we'll have a chance to review those then. And we do also have a question and answer time set aside at the end. So where I want to start with is just what is SuiteFlow? And what SuiteFlow is it's provides a functional way to automate business processes. And SuiteFlow is just the NetSuite terminology for workflow. So I'll be using those terms very interchangeably today. And the big perk of SuiteFlow is that it can be handled through the user interface and that scripting is not required. You don't need to be proficient in JavaScript or SuiteScript. So the audiences, there's those who run it, meaning that they're actually inputting the records that the workflow is running on. They likely wouldn't even know that there's a workflow running in the background. And there's those who are more of the super users, admins, who create and manage workflows. That's who more of the audience is for this presentation today and what the focus will be. So to start with, I want to just give some examples of some use cases for workflows. Transaction approval process. This is always going to be the most common scenario that people use as an example. So let's say you have some sort of hierarchy that you go through when a purchase order is put through. It needs to go through an approval through a supervisor. Next one is data entry validation. So this would be as the user is entering data into a form, there should be some sort of checks, and this can be done with a workflow. Setting field values. So again, you have a schedule and you are in some way validating the data that goes in. You can use a workflow to, on a scheduled basis, set values. And bottom ones, setting field display type, kind of goes with that data entry validation. You want a field hidden based on what a user's inputting. You want a field to be mandatory based on what a user's inputting. That can be done with workflow. And then again, for email, based on conditions. So maybe the marketing campaign is too broad. You want more conditionality. Use it for lead nurturing. Once a new lead gets put in, you want a welcome email to them. A workflow can be used for that. The last example I have right away is adding buttons to forms. So you want to create some sort of dynamic aspect to this where when someone clicks a button on your form, something else should happen. A workflow is a great use case. And the first contrast I want to make is between workflows and scripts. So in short, you will run into something that a workflow just cannot do. This can be defined as multiple joins, or there's just specific records, parts of records that workflows just don't have access to. That at that point, it would need to go to a script. The other perk that a script has over a workflow is the source control and migrating between environments. To touch on that even more, anyone that's had to bundle or use the copy to account functionality with workflows knows the challenge and oftentimes the lack of success of using those to move a workflow from sandbox to production. In my experience, I usually end up just creating it in the production environment. Now on the other side, why would you use, say, a workflow versus a script if you're someone that could do either? It's a pretty simple task. It could be accomplished with both. The workflow has the ability to be less complex, which means there's a lower barrier to entry to work with it. So this also allows for a larger audience. It's easier to find someone else that can support it. And also, even without totally understanding exactly what the script is doing, there's the visual aspect to it, so someone can follow along and say, well, I kind of get what the process is here, and look at that through the workflow diagrammer. So in that sense, you can say a workflow is a less expensive option just because there's a lot wider audience of people that can maintain and support it. And the other contrast I want to make is against the custom field and forms. So I don't want to just give one tool and say this should be used in all situations. At times, if you have, let's say, a static default value, it may not be necessary to use a custom field or a workflow for that. Instead, you could just use a custom field, and that can be associated there. And same thing with the custom form. If this field is always going to be mandatory, that could instead be set on the form rather than using a workflow to do so. And just here's a model to visualize those last two pieces. This should kind of be the hierarchy you're following through when you're thinking about what is the right tool to handle my customization I'm trying to make. So in most cases, your custom field form can likely accommodate it. If that doesn't work, maybe move down to workflow. Can this handle this? If so, great. If that can't, then it probably would have to be a script. And again, these can sometimes be used in tandem. A script can drive a workflow. Workflows can include custom fields, but just thinking about which tool best fits your situation. So next piece I'll be moving to is managing existing workflows. And so where I want to start here is just where you'll be looking at when you are working with your workflows. So this again would be more for the admin, someone who's creating these. This is the existing workflow list, which you can navigate to by going to that workflow tab under the admin role. So this page can be customized similarly to how with a save search by going to edit view. But you'll notice right away that there are some native filters that you get right when you open this page the first time. So for record type, the owner, release status, and if it came from a bundle, but you can still add additional detail as needed through a save search by pressing the edit view. This next page is the workflow definition. So that previous slide was all of these records in list form. This one is where you actually set the detail. So when you create a new workflow, and I'll be clicking through this in NetSuite to bring this together, but you can set some specific types of detail for all workflows. This is something that you need to set for every single workflow that you create. So here's where you set the record type. And the other one I want to highlight right away is that release status and the instance in history. So this instance in history is pretty often what you'll be using for troubleshooting workflows. And for that release status, that's a pretty important portion of workflow creation. So there's 4 different statuses. There is suspended. This is no new instances are created, no existing workflows are run. So that's a total pause on workflows. There's not initiating, so no new workflow will run on any records, but it will finish out those that are in progress. There's testing, so this is your main one that you'll be using while creating your workflow. This will only run for the employee listed in that actual owner field. And then there's released. So this is your go live status. And I also did note that inactive works pretty similarly to not initiating. The main difference is it won't natively show up in that list shown on that previous slide. The next piece I want to highlight is this workflow instance search. So I touched on how you'll want to turn on collecting instances. Instances are the actual execution of your workflow. By tracking these, you can actually see where the workflow is when it's running. You can locate based on a specific workflow or also record type. And here you can collect different types of data. So the best use case I can think of is you have a scheduled workflow that runs, you have all these instances there, and you want to be able to locate them. So it ran on 20 different records. You could filter down to that scheduled workflow it just ran, and then see your instances that way. This can also be used as a dashboard. So if your work instance has a pending approval one, you want to be able to keep track of those. This could be set as a reminder and then added to your dashboard. The only drawback to this workflow instance search is it doesn't provide access to the log, and that log is where it really stores that conditionality detail and why did it fail or why did this not execute. So to get that, you'll actually have to go to the underlying record, which there is a link to on this type of search. And to spend a bit more time on that idea, instance and history records are going to be your main troubleshooting method. These are located on the record, the workflow it's running on. So I'll go back to this on that workflow definition page, but once you turn on keep workflow instances in history, these will be available. They're generated every time a workflow starts, and they get generated each time a workflow enters a different state. And if you have the enable logging turned on, you can get down to this page right here, which shows the actual conditionality. So did this execute? So this was a set field value. If it executed, it would let you know, and you can see the time. And if there was a condition, if it was only supposed to execute if quantity was greater than 5, it would also show that logic down here too. You'll run into times if it's an admin of workflows that a workflow gets stuck, or in some way you just need to cut it off. To cancel just a workflow one time, you can navigate to the same, this would be the system information subtab in most environments, but in this demo one, it was called the workflow subtab, and you would be able to locate your active workflows, and you could click the cancel button to cancel just one workflow at a time. Some situations that's not really sustainable. This workflow ran on 50 records. It's not very feasible to click through every single record, go down and cancel. There's also the ability to use mass update. As you create a workflow, this mass update provides different ways to manage it. So there's a mass update for initiate, processing, transitioning, and canceling. I give a bit more explanation on each of those, but the one that I've had in my time the most use for is this canceling. What this does is you can put in some criteria. So all my workflows in state 2 pending approval, I need to cancel those and end that right now. Then that workflow is just canceled at that point. And then another great reference for managing workflows would be the scripted records page. I gave the navigation here for the admin role if you're in the Classic Center, but here you can get a lot of detail about what is actually running on that record. You can run into issues of if you have multiple workflows, which of my workflows is driving this type of action that I don't want. So you could navigate to a specific record type, and from there, you can get a list of all the workflows currently running. You can get the status. So if one workflow is creating issues, I would right away be able to say, well, it's either the testing or the released one. Those are the only two that are even currently running. You can also get some more detail on the trigger types. When is this running? So is this going before load and so on? The one drawback to this is for anyone that's actually clicked through the script parts of this, you'll notice that those are drag and drop. They can be reordered. That same ordering does not exist for workflows. So generally the order in which a workflow executes is depending on trigger or the order it was created. So managing that order of workflow execution is a bit more difficult. Some methods are to have a master workflow that's going to push these off at the times you want, have one workflow kick off another, and try not to have dependent workflows on the same record. So they shouldn't both be on different field edits, for example. And the last piece for managing will be for running the Suite script and trigger workflows. So this can be done for importing records. So if you do or do not want your workflow to be ran when importing records, this is an option on the advanced options screen during your import, and this can be deselected. Natively and by default in environments, this is deselected, but you can also set this as a preference at the company level to default to be selected for all imports. So what this will do is this will trigger that workflow to run even if the record is imported. Some best practices are try to have this disabled when importing legacy data. Usually you've done some sort of validation on that already. You're comfortable with it. You don't need a, say, approval process for it. And then have enabled when importing or after go live. The only drawback to this is it can slow your import process. So if it's a rather large import already, maybe you want to take that in a case-by-case situation. So with that, we'll start moving on to some demonstrations. And before I start my first one actually in NetSuite, I will lay a little bit of groundwork. So I think it's useful to think about the actual process prior to doing the creation in NetSuite. So I put out a little visual here. So I would start with some sort of sketch, and these are the parts I would think about would be the start state, actions needed, decisions, and completion. So again, your start state is what's actually kicking off my workflow. Is it going to be because someone edited a field? Is it going to be on a schedule? Actions needed. So what's my workflow actually trying to accomplish? Am I setting a field value? Am I doing some sort of validation on the form? Decisions, should this action only happen if there's another condition? So if it's a specific customer, then this should happen. And completion, what should this look like at the end? The last piece I have there is this method of sketch. I gave some examples, but in my experience, I usually do this on pen and paper, just something to sketch out beforehand, because once you start in NetSuite, you'll have to do a lot of rework if you haven't really thought about the process from start to finish. And so the first demo I'll be doing will be touching on triggers, but I think prior to that, it's helpful to at least have a baseline for what triggers are. My main takeaway that I want from this slide is that there are two types of triggers. There's client and there are server. So client triggers actually occur in your browser. What this is going to mean for creating workflows is that if you want somewhat of a dynamic form, so you want as soon as someone edits something, a field needs to become mandatory, you're going to want to use a client trigger. On the other side, the server triggers occur server side, as it says in the name. So if you want this to happen after record submit, for example, there needs to be some sort of backend validation, you would use a server trigger. And this is even a more plain English way to understand that previous slide. I still use this as a reference when creating workflows. It just kind of gives you a quick overview of here's a trigger that would be appropriate to use for this situation. For example, records already loaded into browser, any client trigger. So just this is a good Suite Answers article that can be found. I believe you can just type in trigger execution model, and then you could find this visual here. And so for this first demo will be just a data entry validation. So this one's going to be pretty simple in the scope of workflows. This will be just a single state. It'll have a client trigger, and then it'll also have just one condition in it. And we'll also use this as a time to look at the workflow history. And let me navigate into NetSuite. And is everyone able to still see my screen?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Oops, I may have to get out of PowerPoint. So I am in the admin role, so I do have the classic center. So for others, this navigation may be slightly different, but to start with, we'll navigate to that full workflow page. And let's go ahead and create a new workflow. You'll usually want to pick some sort of descriptive name. So this one is sending a field mandatory. Again, let's follow the ID naming convention that's recommended by NetSuite. So to have some sort of description in here. This first one I want to touch on is this record type. So here's where you set that first piece. So this is going to be a transaction since I want this to run on sales orders. As soon as I select transaction, I get down to all these subtypes. And so from there, I'm just going to select sales order, description where needed. Your owner, for the most part, should be the person creating it, but that can be customized if needed. This execute as admin. So what this allows for is the person that actually is going to trigger and run this workflow is likely not in an admin role. They are someone that's entering sales orders. Execute as admin would allow them the workflow to still run even if that user did not have permission. So for example, maybe this workflow is pulling in data from a different employee record. That user actually did not have access to it. If this execute as admin is turned on, that workflow still would run. If it wasn't turned on, it would error out because that user does not have access to the employee record. So release status, I touched on this, but you would leave this in testing for now while I'm building this, then keep instance in history, again, only when testing. And I'm gonna go ahead and enable logging. And right now I'm only gonna have this on create. I'll get more into these event definitions with the next one. But for now, what this does is every time you create a workflow, this will run. On viewer update means that if you edit it or view it, it would also run, but we're gonna limit the scope of this one currently. And so here's our actual workflow diagrammer. So it's pretty visual. You can drag, move stuff around. You can move different transitions this way. This workflow is only going to be one state. So if you double click into this, best practice is going to be to name your states, number them so that way they're easy to keep track of. And again, put some sort of description in there so you know what briefly at a glance what that state is doing. As soon as you enter that name, NetSuite's going to make you save that state. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new action. Actions are what actually drive the workflow to do anything, whether that's set a field value, set a field mandatory. And you'll notice just a whole slug of actions in this account. There's quite a lot of customizations, so all of these custom ones you likely wouldn't see, but what I'm looking for is setting field mandatory. And so I want to find the field I want to set mandatory right away. So my example, I want the contract term to become mandatory if anyone enters a value into the order type. And let me open up a sales order to make that more clear. So in this business case, every time someone enters a contract new, they need to have a contract term, right? That's what my users have told me. That's how it should work. But it does need to be dynamic. If they enter contract upsell, it doesn't need to happen. So let me go ahead and find contract term, set mandatory. I want it to happen after that field is edited. So let me go and check this trigger, set this to after field edit. And up here, I can find all my triggering client fields. And so let me find order type. So all of your mainline fields from that sales order are available here. And there it is. And here's where we're going to put in our first condition. So if I didn't put in a condition, this would take place regardless of what value was selected on the sales order, because there should be some conditionality to this. We are going to add one part that NetSuite needs to look at before setting that field mandatory. And so as soon as I open this, all those options from that list record on sales order are available. Contract new is what I want. Maybe the situation was contract new and contract upsell should be included, but for now, just contract new. Okay, from there, that should be okay to save. So right now this is in a testing status, so it is available to run for me, the owner. So if I open up a new sales order, so right now if I select new, nothing happens. So let me open up a new one. And this field will become mandatory because that one is selected. Any questions on that first one right away?
Yes, there is a question. I think
Oh,
he's
great.
posting or typing it up. Go ahead and type, okay. Devin asks, is there a way to override a workflow, say it is more of an FYI?
You wouldn't want to use the set field mandatory in that situation. You could find another action that may be more appropriate. Let me think of one right away. You could do a show message. That would give them an alert more so. I thought there was an alert option, but maybe not. But yes, I guess would be my short answer.
So you would be able to set that, show that message based on different criteria that happens on the form, right?
You're right, right. So let's even just put that example in. In more or less the exact same way that we just did there, where we have the exact same setup after field edit. And let me go ahead and make this inactive. And again, open up a new sales order since this is only running on create. Cool, you say okay, and then it does give you the warning. That dialog box can sometimes be a bit misleading because it looks so much like the NetSuite Air dialog box, but could certainly be used for that use case.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is that people will typically, they'll just see a pop-up and they'll just click it without even reading it, right? That sometimes, like,
Right.
if you don't have a field mandatory,
Exactly, right.
you can't, and Devin, your follow-up says, I'm wanting them to check that they intend to fill in a field the way they do before they save. So I don't know that there's a way to, well, yeah, I mean, basically you have to click OK on that pop-up message, right? But it'll still let them save without filling in that field.
Right, so it does require some.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, cool. I don't think there's any other questions right now.
Right, and you could have it run no matter what they put in. Yep, another note it looks like, do the action return user error. Yep, and I believe the user error won't save the record. I believe would be the drawback of that. Oh, sorry, am I breaking up?
You were for a second. It sounds okay to me now. Maybe you are breaking up. We can't hear you right now.
No, sorry, I did not say anything.
Oh.
Do I sound better now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, so I will pick up from where we were. Where we left was with that data entry validation demo. A couple questions on that. If anyone has another question there, we can certainly pick that back up, or else we can pick that up during the Q&A session. But with that, I'll move on to the next workflow to actually create in NetSuite. To lay some groundwork for this one also, I breezed past this event definition for the previous one that I just put together, but there's two different ways to kick off your workflow. It can be by an event or with a schedule. So for that event-based, how I did that one was just on create, but there's also the option to on viewer update. So the distinction there is, do you want this to only run when it's an actual new record being created in NetSuite, or viewer update means every single time that record gets opened, this workflow is going to run. As you can imagine, that can create many, many instances of that workflow running. The trigger type, NetSuite's going to default this to all for new ones. It's usually a good place to leave it unless you have a reason to. So they'll get back to those triggers that I showed a few slides before of the timing of when that workflow should take place. So then there's also event types. These are something that I don't often like using, from the sense that you can create logic gaps, meaning that you can set this up in such a way that a workflow will never run. So you can have an on viewer update workflow that only has an event type of create, and NetSuite will say that's fine, go ahead and do that. And when you do it, that workflow is never actually going to trigger because there's just a disconnect between how these are set up. So if you come across situations where you do need it, it is an option, but it's not something I like using constantly. And the last piece I want to touch on was context. So context would be the method of record entry, so if the workflow should be triggered or not. The most common use case is through the user interface, but there are other ones. So maybe you want it to go through the UI, but you don't ever want it to run on CSV import. CSV import is a available context, map reduce, a whole bunch of options. By default, NetSuite will, well, as of 2020.1, select all but 2 options for the most part. Unless you have a use case to mess with that, you can leave it as NetSuite natively does. So for this next workflow I'll be showing will be a scheduled one. This is when you want it to run on a scheduled timing. So to do this though, you do need a saved search filter. The inputs of that saved search need to be the same record type as the base record of that workflow. So for example, if your workflow runs on the customer, your saved search needs to also be a customer workflow or search. Some other detail you can there, so repeat. So you want this to go, looks like in this example down here, I have it going daily, so it's gonna run every single day from this time period. So by 11/20/20 for the next year. In execution time, so when do you actually want this to go through these records in the search and run on those? Best practice, again, it would be to use an execution time that's not peak hours for your business, because depending if there's 10,000 records the search is running on, this could be pretty heavy, and there's limits to the amount of records that these scheduled searches can be running on, or apologies, scheduled workflow can be running on. And then the last piece that you can add here is repeat every day, or you can say only do this Monday through Friday. Cool, so to set the stage for this next one, this workflow will be to set a value on a customer. So let's say, for example, the field that you want to touch isn't available in inline editing, so it's then also not available to mass update. A workflow can sometimes have access to those types of fields that aren't otherwise accessible through those means. So the inputs to this will be defining your search of what criteria you want in there to run on, and then using your criteria to say, these are the fields that are going to be updated, and then you can build the workflow that way. So let's get into that. So I'm just going to start at my homepage again. The first thing we'll need to do for this type of workflow actually is create our search. So let me get to that. And so since I know that this will be a customer search, since I'm going to run this on customer records, I can go ahead and set that up. For my workflow scheduled searches, I do like to put something like this in my title and also make them not public. The idea is we don't want someone to come and use this for their own use and overwrite and change this, because that could interfere with the workflow. And for our criteria, we're using this as a way to, every time a new customer gets set up, they need to have their credit limit established and also that credit hold field set. So we're going to have that as our criteria. And it's actually a good time to use our OR operator. So that way, if just one of these are flagged true, it will still return in our results and our workflow will still run. Again, to make this search more easy to understand, we can go ahead and add just a little bit of detail to pull in. And let's go ahead and see how many records we're returning right away. Cool, $12.99. So that meet either of those. So either they did not have a credit limit set already, or the credit limit was hold was set to auto or off. Let me actually change that. Okay, perfect. Yep, because I want to be changing that to auto instead. So from there, we can start building our workflow. So our same navigation. This time I'm going to skip straight to new. I usually do like to put schedule somewhere in the title of my scheduled workflows. You'll notice that there's not just an easy way to query which one are scheduled, so using that in your naming convention can sometimes be beneficial. Record type, set customer. Again, we have our subtypes. I only want this to run for customers. I don't need this for lead and prospects. I don't know if those fields are available. Execute as admin. May not be necessary for this one, but I will turn it on. Let's go ahead and enable logging again and have the release status, and let's keep instance and history. So you'll notice that as soon as I switch from event-based to scheduled, we'll get some different options down here. So our save search filter. These are all searches that are filtered down to the customer. So that is how this list gets made. So you'll see a bunch of other ones in here beyond the ones I created. And again, we can set some more details. So do we want this to repeat? Yes, we're gonna have this run daily. This is an end of day validation. I'm gonna do, it's gonna be scheduled from 5:13, and I like to have it, well, let's say 5:14, run for the first time at midnight. And scheduled until. I actually looked into this. I always assumed that if you don't put an end date on it, that means it runs in perpetuity, but I have not been able to have that confirmed. So if anyone does have knowledge on that and wants to share that, that's helpful, but I do usually like to put an end date on it because I don't want to have workflows ending on a period that I don't know. Go ahead and save this. So this part's going to be fairly similar. Set field values, give some sort of description name. Maybe I'll make a little bit better name. That's what's going to make you save it as soon as you update that name so that I can go back into it right away. And so now we're back on our actions. The last ones we just used were set field mandatory, show message. Now we're going to use set field value, and this will probably be your most commonly used action. This is just how you enter a value into a field. And our field is going to be credit limit. And let's just say 1,000. That's going to be our new standard amount that we're going to have for all new customers. And we're going to do something just about the same. Credit hold, that list is now available to us. And we're going to switch this hold to auto for any of those that are not yet. So that way the hold will actually be enforced. So now we have these set. Should be okay to run this. Now this is something that's unique to scheduled workflows, is that you get this execute now button. And what this will do, this is only available when the release status is testing. So if I switch that to released, well, I guess it is still there. Execute now should only run on the first 20 records. I believe it's only available when the status is under testing. I think if I saved it when that was released, that would go away. But it's a way to quickly, so you don't have to just say, well, I need to set this next execution time to be 11:30 because I want to see if this runs. This gives you that immediate way to see if that's going to run. And so we can actually get right away the feedback on this. So right now we have 1,299 records in this list. Once I hit execute and I give it a minute or so, that number should go down because that means that this workflow is successfully running. And let me save this. May not have liked that I changed that release status. And we should be seeing that number decrease. Cool, so I was able to run already on 14 records. And then to bring this back to what we touched on earlier, this would be a great case since how do I find my 15 records that just this workflow just ran on? We could use a workflow instance search to do so. So right now, it's just pulling in all instances. My workflow name is set customer field, so let's filter down to him. And right away, I have my list of records that this workflow ran on. Any initial questions on that? Scheduled workflows in general?
Doesn't look like we have any questions yet. If somebody thinks of something, yeah, Jason says, is that save search a canned search?
I created it, no. So usually it'll be pretty uncommon that, yeah. And so I may have glossed over this, but the type, so meaning that this has to be a customer search, needs to match the same type set on the workflow, meaning that that workflow ran on customers to make it available there. And then you at least need one criteria in your search for it to show. Oh, the workflow instance search, got it.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Sure.
Yeah, I like the workflow instance search too. One other trick that you can do is just add an email action on your workflows when you're testing, and then you get an email that can link to the record that it triggered on. But this is a great method.
Right. And I do like to actually put just the filter in here in the region, so that way I pull it in, it has every single one, and then I do it on an as-need basis rather than changing my criteria every time. So I guess you'll notice that there is no criteria to answer that earlier question.
That's great. And then Margie had another question back on the workflow contexts. She says, why are the contexts now showing for the actions? This is new with 2020.1. Should you delete them or deselect?
I do not believe context being shown is new. I believe the only thing that's new is that now NetSuite defaults to 32 of 34, and someone can correct me if I'm incorrect on the context piece. But to delete them, I mean, for me, I use the default usually, but otherwise I would just deselect all, which actually selects all, which is a new part of 2020.1 that it now tells you how many are selected.
Alex, can you hear me?
Hey.
Yep.
Yeah, hi Margie.
Okay. If you go into the actions, go back to where you were, just one screen back. Notice under context, it's showing all that. It didn't used to be there. It used to be empty.
Got it.
And now it's just like filling up with miscellaneous information that I don't think is relevant.
Right.
So it used to be a really clean list. Can you just delete all those? You know, if you delete them like you were just showing, then they don't show up and it looks like it did before 2020.1. Why did they put those in 2020?
What are the two that are not selected?
So the first part is So they were always shown there like that. It's just that this was by default select all, which shows nothing in that line. I believe the two that are not selected by default are web application and web store. So such as like a web services and then web store, meaning a web order. Those are the two. It's pretty annoying that they don't give an ability to change this because, I mean, again, my preference would be just to, I don't know, select them all or not have them all selected.
Yeah.
Now, I believe if I save this, let me test that. Yeah, so that does wipe out our context, which is the view that you're used to having pre-2020.1.
Right.
Does it provide any value now that they're all showing, is my question.
In my mind, I mean, that's not very readable, so not incredibly valuable, but if you do have a action dependent on context, then I guess this would be a short way to look at it. I wonder if I look in here. No, it doesn't say here, so that's the only place to find it. Yeah, so I guess the only place to hide it is by either selecting all or selecting none. So I guess there's not really a workaround to it, is my short answer.
There's another question from Jamie, asks, what is the risk if you don't select all contexts?
If you, for example, only select user interface, then it's not going to run if anyone enters an order or a transaction or a record not through the user interface. So I guess the risks go both ways, right? It may run on a record in a scenario you don't want it to if you have them all selected, but also if you only have the one that you think you want to use selected and you expect it to run when you import, well, you didn't have that selected, now it's not going to run. So I guess the risks go both ways. And Mike had a question for the search. Does the save search need to be owned by the same person who owns the workflow? You noted that you do not make the save search public. Yeah, that is a good consideration. I mostly am making my search for my workflow, so I haven't come across a scenario where I want to use someone else's save search in my scheduled workflow, but I think that is a fair limitation of not making it public. So I guess having that name of do not edit is hopefully a big enough barrier for someone to not come in and change that criteria or results in there. It's good questions, and it looks like that's it. So I will keep moving on. I guess my only question is, we did have a break scheduled. Should we call that 10-minute troubleshooting the break, or do we want to still take some time?
Why don't we just do a 5-minute break since we had a short break just a little bit ago.
Right.
Do a bio break and then we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good to get started again, Alex.
Okay, perfect. There's one other piece I realized when I walked away that I didn't show, and it's where to locate that same type of detail on the record. So I showed you can run an instant search and get that detail, but if you are running something and you want to see it on the specific record, is also available under system information and workflow history. And here we have all of the workflows that have been running. If you had an active workflow, so it hadn't exited yet, you could find them here. This is where that cancel button will come into play. But the workflow history, you can open this up, check your log. This is gonna far and away be your biggest troubleshooting tool. So if there was some extra layer of logic, this only ran if the credit limit was above $500, it would replace it. It would show that logic here. So when you're designing your workflow, you're gonna spend a lot of time creating it, testing it, going to the record, seeing if it succeeded, opening this up, seeing if there's any other detail in here you can find of why it didn't execute the way you intended. The next one I want to touch on, so the next example I'll be giving is the more traditional approval hierarchy. To start with, NetSuite does provide some out-of-the-box templates that you can use for an approval. These are just come with all of your environments, and even if you're very proficient, to me, they're still just a good starting point. They give a good example of how to go about using different functionalities. There's already a prepackaged workflow field. It sends emails, so just a good starting point. The next part that I'll also be adding to it, so I'll take that native template and I'll add a bit more functionality to it to make it fit my business needs, to build that dynamic aspect of a workflow. You can add conditions, so conditions can be done in a few different ways. They can be done with a formula, so if you're someone that's familiar with SQL or the SuiteScript API, only 1.0 version, you can use that. You can use expressions. This is probably my more common use. Actually build this expression, use your ors, ands, not statements, and build it that way. Or else you can also do a search, which is probably my least common one. And I just alluded to about workflow and state fields that will also be included in this next workflow I'll be showing. So what a workflow field is it applies to only that workflow. It only exists there, or you're not going to find it on a transaction or employee record. It lives there and it just holds a value for that workflow. You'll find quite a few use cases for this as you start creating more of, oh, there's a value I need to store right up front. I want to have that saved because this record could be moving through different employees and such. The other one is a state field. So this is only going to work similar to that workflow field, but instead it's only going to exist with that state. Pretty few use cases in my experience. I think you'd have to have a pretty complex workflow to find a use for this, but it does exist. And then the last one is transitions. So transitions are how you direct your workflow to transition from state to state. You can drag in this to states in the UI. You can set conditions, but they can be a pretty powerful tool since they're what can say, once this happens, so my best example is a button. Once someone actually presses a button, then this workflow should continue on. So I'm going to create this purchase order approval. I'm going to start with the template. I'm going to add just a couple layers for it. So I'm going to add that if the purchase order amount is under a certain amount, that it should go straight to approved. We don't want all of our POs to have to go to a supervisor. It's a hold up. If it's under 10K, let's just approve it. And then I'm also going to add that condition should happen on that button pressed. So with that, let me jump back into NetSuite. Close out a few tabs. So again, same navigation. We'll go to new. But if we go down to this list right here, we'll see this from template. That's what gives you already kind of your base transactions, journal entry, purchase order, sales order. I will say the one with the journal entry can actually be a bit more complex because the difficulty of getting the actual journal entry total, and because journal entries are generated in so many ways. So that's why I didn't want to use this one for an example. So I think anyone that's created JE approval can relate to that. So I'll start with the purchase order. And so this is it right out of the box. Neatly names our states. We got some transitions happening. We even have a way for it to be rejected and then go back to approval. So what I wanted to add was also an ability for an admin to approve at all times. Let's say the supervisor is on vacation. That's my workaround, is an admin has to come in and handle that. So that'll be the first change I'll make to this out of the box approval. So we'll notice that we have these buttons right here, right? These are triggered on before load. So meaning before that record's actually in your browser, that this is already looking at this logic. So let me go ahead and add another line to this. So right now this is using that expression builder. So we're just gonna add one piece to this. So we're gonna click use expressions. And I want this to be an or statement. An or statement means that if either of these are true, so either of these lines of conditions are true, then it will go ahead and do the condition of this workflow, which is allowing for that button to be there. Go ahead and save that, and I'll make right away the exact same change. You'll notice that this pane over here provides some pretty good detail about what's all going on in that state. So rather than having to click open up the state and view it that way, you can use this pane over here. And this also brings me to a drawback of workflows of if you notice that I'm adding just one condition to these. Let's say this was a much more complex condition. There's 4 lines and I need to make this change everywhere in the workflow. That's certainly a drawback of there's really no easy way to copy this condition throughout that workflow if that should be changed, other than going in doing exactly what I'm doing, where I have to go in manually make my updates. Okay, so now I've satisfied my first condition where I have a way that when the supervisor isn't available to approve, that someone else can come in and approve. The next scenario I wanted was currently this transition, it goes to pending approval no matter what. It's not looking at a dollar amount. It just, as soon as it's submitted for approval, it goes to pending approval. I don't want that. I want there to be a threshold that looks at. So I took it through the UI and I dragged and dropped it straight to approved. I'll need to add a condition to this transition. So the first part I want is I want it to execute on button. So that button is already preloaded as part of the template. And I want to add my condition. And let me make sure I have that right field there. Anyone that's created these knows that there's about 4 different ways that total amount gets referred to on a record, so it can sometimes be tricky to know which one's the correct one. but fortunately I've already created these beforehand, so I can check here. Okay. And so I did have the correct field in there, but with these types of ones, you have total amount, you have total order amount. Knowing exactly the correct one to use can sometimes just be a guess and check game. So if my total amount is less than or equal to, so that's the condition we'll look at the purchase order total. It will transition directly to approved. And I'll need to also update this one too, because now there's one side of that condition. I want it to go to pending approval only if my total is greater than, because I had the equal to on my other side, 10,000. So rendering kind of funny there, but okay, now it's all back in place. Cool, so I took the normal one that just submitted everything to pending approval, submitted everything to the supervisor, and instead made it just a bit more logic to better fit my company. So let me go ahead and let's actually run that through purchase order. And I'll need to have this testing so it runs for me. Actually, I'll skip straight to released. And for this keep instance in history, it defaults to only when testing. So you can start to bog down your system by having so many instance records kept on. So early on after go live, I do like to turn it on just because I still want to be sure it's working properly. But once it's stable and working, you should either switch this to never or only when testing. But for now, I will turn it on. And everything else I can leave as is from the template. Let me open up a new purchase order to be sure that that change I just made is in place. And from here, this would be a user who'd be the one filling this out. And we can start with a one that is in excess of 10,000 because we want this one to go to pending approval. I must have accidentally created two buttons, so look past that. Oh, actually, I have two workflows running, so that would be the reason for that. So let me cancel the old one. Okay. Cool, so I canceled the one, I tested one yesterday, it was still released, so they were both doing the same thing, but now that one should be there. Let me double check that. And that is the one I've just created that is active. So the submit for approval, this is in that native template again, just because you enter into the system doesn't necessarily mean that it should kick off the approval process. This gives the employee a chance to make any edits, changes prior to sending it to their supervisor for approval. Now, once I hit that, that will move it to the next state in this approval workflow. If my approval workflow is working correctly, this should go to a pending approval. Which it did. Since I added that condition that even though I'm not Nicole Mihalov, it will still allow me to approve and reject because I am in the admin role. If I logged in now with a different role, I would not see these buttons. I would just see a locked purchase order. let's go ahead into this history. So this acted how I was hoping. So again, it's looking at next approver or admin. Next approver is that user. So if I was Nicole or if I'm an admin, it's going to go ahead and add those buttons. And see if I can find my transition. And here it is. And here is that detail for that transition. So it said once I hit submit for approval, it's looking at this condition. My condition was total in excess of 10,000. Then it should move on to pending approval. But a lot more detail in here, as you can see. So just a great troubleshooting method is to use these workflow logs. So now when I go ahead and approve this, now it goes to pending billing, approval status approved. No issues with me as an admin approving. Some other details that this would, again, just comes prepackaged with. It would send an email to whoever created this PO. I have my emails filtered, so it moves all the NetSuite stuff to a separate bin, so I did not get a notification. But I'm sure if I looked in my inbox, it would say, hey, just wanted to let you know that whomever did approve your purchase order. This also, that detail is stored in a workflow field. So in the first state, again, this already came with the template. It stores whoever created this workflow in a workflow field. That's how it uses that value to know who to send the email to, and also who the supervisor of that, whoever created that purchase order is, to set up as the next approver. And then the other side, let's say I did enter one below my threshold dollar amount. Again, what kicks off this workflow, I have time to change stuff. I can change my detail, maybe the quantity changed, whatever. But as soon as I hit submit for approval, it's going to look at that condition of the total amount that's being evaluated on. And rather than having approve and reject in a locked record, went straight to the approved state. If you're troubleshooting, we're going to go back down here and we're going to look at the log. Maybe this time I'm more curious if my next approver got set. It did. I want to know why it didn't transition to pending approval. Oh, it's because the total was not greater than 10,000. So that's why it transitioned to approved. So this one was executed because that total was less than 10,000. Is there any initial questions right away on approvals? I feel like approvals are just the most common use case, so they take up a lot of space in the workflow areas.
What happens, Alex, when if somebody hits the reject but option? It just goes back into?
I believe there was a resubmit option based on that. Yeah, so it looks like there was. So it would, again, it just kind of sits in a non-approved status, so it can't be billed given the settings right now in this NetSuite environment. They would now get this new button that says resubmit for approval. So for whatever reason, they need to fix some detail. They could push this again and it pushes it back into pending approval. So then you get that approve and reject button again. Looks like there's an email sent to notify the user also.
Okay. Looks like Margie has a question. How often do you use the lock? Do you mean the lock record, Margie? Yes.
I think it's one of those things that's better in principle. It's a better idea, but when you actually try to apply it and make users go with it, I feel like I always end up inactivating it pretty early on, just because actually locking a record and not allowing for it to be edited, it becomes pretty restrictive. So even an admin then can't come in and make changes, but it's a useful tool, I guess, to have if needed. But my success rate of getting adoption of it's always been pretty low.
Okay.
Cool. I thought the approval flow would really get people going, but I will move on to the next one.
All right.
So this is going to be the last one that we're going to have time to walk through. So this is about sublist accessibility and where that is currently in NetSuite. So as of maybe 2-3 years ago, workflows could not touch sublists full stop. They're incrementally increasing the amount of access that workflows do have. It's definitely not a silver bullet, all-encompassing solution, but it's getting definitely far more far-reaching. So as of now, you can access item sublists. There's one exception, which I'll come back to. Not all fields in that sublist are going to be available. So if it's not an available item in a dropdown when you're working your workflow, there is no way to say line.field ID and actually access it. If it's not in the dropdown, that sublist item field is not available. And as of 2020.1, they have also added the expense sublist on expense reports. That is the only expense sublist that's available, but this last bullet point is probably more my conjecture, but being at SuiteWorld last year, it certainly seems like there is goal and demand for people wanting more ability to manage sublists with workflows in the future. And so how you access a sublist is with the sublist action group. So what this is you're going to create, and I'll walk through this in NetSuite in just a moment, but you're going to create that sublist action group. You can put a condition at the group level, and then underneath that, you're going to have your actual actions that are going to be applied to the lines in the sublist. So that group condition must be met to actually go through all those actions, and then it will evaluate each line against an action. I think this is going to be a bit more clear when I show it. Excuse me. I believe that a good example is if it should only fire off for a specific customer, that would be your main, that would be your sublist action group condition. And then for quantity greater than 5, it should only go for those lines. It will look at each line, and depending on that, will run the action. And so for this one, this is just creating a pretty simple customer quantity price discount. So I'll update the sublist field based on conditions. So it'll look at the customer, look at a specific item and quantity. If all those are met, we'll go ahead and run. And the other note is the syntax. So if you're putting this into a formula, it's line.field ID. So it's a little bit different, whereas oftentimes it's record.field ID. To get down to a specific line, this will be that syntax that you use. Before I go over to NetSuite, looks like I do have a question from Jacob. Item records under the purchasing tab, can you access the location sublist? No, not to my knowledge, and I feel pretty sure that one is not available. And to start, and for the sake of time, I will just add this on to a workflow that we created at the start of this. And so to recap again, this is the one that I created first. This is doing this for sales orders. Initially, it's only going to set contract start date based on the value in the contract field, but we're even going to extend it a little bit more to also be our sublist value setting workflow. It's usually pretty good practice to, if your workflows are running on the same transaction type, try to pool them together. It makes it easier to manage. You're not looking through 5 different workflows. They're all doing one task. You can pool them together. And I'll even just go ahead and add this right in here. Sublist, so I mean, they have a dropdown, but it is an option of 1. So we can go ahead and select items. And I'll right away put a condition in here. Looking for my name field, or maybe it's customer. Maybe it's none of those. Okay, I'll skip that. I won't have a condition right away. I was going to add to look at the customer, but that won't be important for now. So now that I have that sublist action group, go ahead and click into it. Now this is going to act much like that action screen or that state screen I was on before, where I can even apply actions to my sublist action group. What I'm looking for is setting field value. The field I want is discount percent. Notice that that line attribute is after the field value. So that's how you can tell for something like a subsidiary or any of your other fields that are available both at the main line and at the line level. This is how you can tell them apart. And I'm just going to put in a static value. So if they meet the conditions I'm about to put in, they'll get a 5% discount. And my conditions are the item. So again, it's looking at that item on the line level. So we'll evaluate each line as going down that item sublist is, let's pick the top one. And I was going to add an expression, but actually I don't need to since these will both be and statements. So then if quantity is greater than 10, then it should go ahead and make my discount percentage 5%. So let me go ahead and save this. And I'm actually going to have this run on before record submit. What this means is that before the record's actually saved to the NetSuite server, it'll make this change. It may have worked on entry, but I'm actually not certain. So just to be safe. I have my workflow set to testing, so I should be set to test this out. I didn't put in a condition filter on the customer, so I can grab any customer and this should run for them. I said SaaS license A as the item that it's evaluating against. And let's make one line above the quantity, my workflows are intersecting because it's warning me about credit limits. And this one should be 3. And if this is working appropriately, I would expect this to turn into 5% and this one to stay at 0%. So let's go ahead and save that and give that a try. And it did. There's a lot else going on in this environment, it appears, because I would hope that this discount rate would change, but it looks like that is being calculated elsewhere. But the logic did flow through here. And let's go ahead and try that. The workflow history. I have a few too many workflows running from testing, but mine is the demo sales order set field mandatory. And it even gives us redundant lines. So let's see here, because it's timing, this is before submit. Sublist action group is for items, and it'll say line 1, line 2. Line 2 it did not run. Why did it not run? Because the quantity was not greater than or equal to 10. So it's a pretty good tool already, but just given the limitations, that's only accessible for the item sublist. And even within that, I'm sure if I look through the dropdown, all these fields wouldn't be available. There's definitely some limitations. If you look through Suite Answers, the documentation, a lot of the examples they give of using this sublist workflow actions are with line level approvals or just some sort of price discount like this. So hopefully in the future, this will continue to be expanded upon, but for now, it's definitely got some use cases, but limitations also. If there's any questions or comments on sublist actions that people have.
It's like Jason has a question. Where was the sublist actions located?
So it was this new sublist group, and then by enabling this, so similar to an action, you can set a trigger type. I turned mine to before record submit, just because I believe I need that in place. This needs to happen prior to the record being saved for this to work correctly. And then down here, you select the sublist. Right now, only sublist is ever going to be available, but then once you save this, you're going to get a line for that sublist action group. And then you click into that, and this more or less acts like a state in its own right, where you can add actions and you can add conditions. And I think I did grab the field name of this now, but just to add one more layer, I only wanted this to run for a specific customer. I could add that customer as a condition into my sublist action group. And now, regardless of if a line meets the conditions, the whole sublist action group condition must be met for those lines to be evaluated. So if this discount specific to a customer, it's going to look at the customer, then look at that line detail.
Okay, anybody else have any questions on any of that? Okay, looks like we could, do you have any other demos to go through, Alex?
I do not know. I guess if there's open time, I had a canned question and answer, but I think we are running right up at the end point. So
Yeah, we have a few minutes. If anybody has any general questions about workflows at all, we can throw some of those questions out. I just wanted to make one quick comment on the save search conditions. I find that very useful, especially if you're familiar with save searches and you're used to working in save searches. I feel like you have a lot more control in a save search to define criteria. And so that's also a very good way to create conditions within actions and transitions and things like that. So here's a question from Jamie. On the approval workflow, are you able to route to auto approve if the customer credit hold equals off? Would you do this with a condition or through a save search on the workflow?
Yeah, you should be able to put that as a condition. And I guess to piggyback on what Corey just said, either of those would be options. I guess those are all somewhat replacements for another. So using that expression builder or a saved search, it's kind of just whatever your comfort level is. So Corey just said he works with saved searches a lot. He's very comfortable using those. That's his go-to. There is no right or wrong answer on which of those options should be used, but you should be able to have a condition where it looks at the vendor record, if I'm understanding, customer record, and look at that field. You may have to save that field in a workflow value, and you may have to tweak the trigger types, I think, just at the timing, but yep, that should be a condition you could use.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Any other questions on workflows? Anything at all? Danielle asks, is there a way to let a customer approve a quote via email? It's a good question.
Not to my knowledge, or at least not in the scope of workflow. I'm trying to think what it would ideally, I guess, be that they'd click something in the email they're getting and that would drive something, but yeah, I'd have to ponder that. I can't really give much of an answer on that one right now, sorry.
Okay, Mike asks, is there any way to understand the impact that existing workflows are having on overall system performance?
You can use that same, and I'm not going to recall the name of that Suite app, but that shows your performance based on, and maybe that's something I can follow up with.
Application Performance Monitor.
Yeah, thank you, Corey.
Yep.
And it will show there. Yep, APM Suite app. I forget if it will break it out by workflows or not, or if it will just show it as a user event, but you could get that same type of detail there.
Yeah, the APM is really powerful, has a lot of reporting capabilities on system performance, and it's a free bundle that you can install from NetSuite to monitor your system performance and see how long it takes different records to load or to do different tasks. It's pretty powerful. It's kind of complicated. It takes a little bit of time to figure out what it's telling you, but it definitely can help you find where bottlenecks in the system are, Mike. All right, well, we'll do a last call for any questions on workflows. And Danielle, Clint did have a solution to your question. They had a third party do that for them. And maybe if you guys could post that information on the forum, on the LinkedIn forum, that would be great to understand.